Check. So you're talking about Hauser Street? You're talking about my neighborhood before it was
right. So
good?
So up where Hauser is a little bit further north, like over, but I'm going to say roughly like where Santa Monica is, it starts at Martel. And it's, believe it or not, a great run to get from all the way up at Santa Monica, that area, all the way down. You can get it to Jefferson so you could go to the airport.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So when I was a teeny bopper, there was a point where if you drove through that neighborhood, and so we're talking about like the height of like gangster rap and stuff, it was super sketchy to drive down that street, like super sketchy. And I remember, but it cut you out of traffic.
Oh yeah.
So it was one of those, things where you would be like, fuck, do I want to chance it? You know, do I really want to do, you know, do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
Go cut through the neighborhood. And there were times where it was like, you could see, down on the other side of that world is a project area called the Jungle.
Okay.
And so the heaviest of the heavy, like Crips Bloods confrontation right off of that artery, and you kind of had to cut down that way.
Holy shit.
Pretty gnarly. But that's
you've been to this neighborhood before?
A zillion times. Sure, I grew up in LA.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in LA. And that's the whole, it's LA is an interesting animal, and it constantly just like evolves and changes.
I mean, just like any city probably, but I think it took New York City a little bit longer.
Well, even New York is a different beat. Yes.
Your voice sounds great, by the way.
Thank you.
Sounds really good.
Thank you. The first time I started going to, let me back up. Let me
introduce you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the One Life, One Chance podcast. I'm with my friend here, Doug Carrion. Did I say it right, Carrion?
You said it right.
Carrion?
Carrion.
Where does that name come from?
It's Spanish.
It is?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that about you.
Yeah. So if you go back on the clock, I'm Spanish and Sicilian.
Okay. People might know this wonderful man from bands like Descendents. That was the Enjoy record, correct?
Right.
Dag Nasty.
Yep.
Field Day, Wig Out.
Yep.
I'm
a Circle Jerk alumni too.
And Doggy Style.
Yep.
And Cottonmouth Kings.
It's true.
We're going to get into that later. Humble Gods.
True.
For the love of not Lisa.
True.
I got more shit written down.
Yeah,
but let's rewind though. Before we get into that, because
it's a whole.
I cannot believe Cottonmouth Kings.
It's a long train.
Too?
No, I'll explain
Doug
that to you. But that's a whole nother train. It's a giant train.
All right, so you were born here. Where were you born at?
Believe it or not, I was born in Queens, New York.
What?
I was born in Queens. Of course, the home of the Ramones. I'm going to just throw it right out there. And my mom. And then I lived.
Shit.
I lived again. We're going to go deep. I lived in Greenwich Village as a kid, right next door to Electric Ladyland.
Wow.
So that's that. And then I moved to Hermosa Beach, California when I was 4.
Okay.
And started going to school there. And Hermosa Beach at the time was very incredibly counterculture, because that's kind of where the hippies lived. And the hippies were really quite against what was going on, Vietnam War and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my mom was part of the counterculture, and I grew up there. And that's kind of it. And so there's something very unique. I've been thinking about this too. There's something very unique about people that grew up in Hermosa Beach, you know, because their parents were kind of like renegades and outcasts for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And then you go one step further and you're like, oh shit, well then it's no surprise that when those families start having kids, those kids have a lot of fuck you in them.
Yeah.
And that's how you get, you know, whether you're talking about the Black Flag people or you're talking about the Pennywise people or whatever. It's like, there's Circle Jerks people. There's something very funny about the counterculture, and then the second generation of the counterculture that was whatever version of punk rock on the timeline.
Yeah.
Whatever, I don't know.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
So, how are you? How are your parents? Do you have strict parents growing up?
No. So my mom was a straight up hippie. I grew up incredibly poor. So I grew up with I'm going to go backwards for a second.
Sure.
My mom my mom basically was like a Mother Teresa kind of character where there were 5 of us, but then my mom was always like adopting stray kids. So my mom is like a very Mother Teresa kind of a character. And so I grew up in this, I didn't grow up with a lot of money, but I was surrounded by I grew up in a single parent household, but
lots of love,
a lot of love, but also just a wolf pack of kids. And so I was in the middle of the pack, in the middle of the pack. And that's kind of it. So I just had this very different kind of upbringing. My mom, I wouldn't say that my mom was strict at all because my mom was part of the counterculture. So I got exposed to a lot of things that maybe as a parent you go, holy smokes, I'd never do that in a million years. I never.
Now looking back.
Now, but again, you make decisions or whatever, and she's just making decisions. And so, so I would say my mom was like liberal, really, she's a freaking hippie. Like I could tell my mom like, hey, the waves are better. The waves are good today. And she'd be like, okay, it's a surf day. And like, I wouldn't have to go take history tests or whatever.
Wow.
So she's pretty, maybe that was just her way of just, she kind of raised us to be individuals. And that was her way of just being like, I'm not going to conform, and I wouldn't expect my kids to conform.
I love that.
Kind of like that. So that was it. That was it.
So how many brothers and sisters?
There's I have an older brother, Adam. So there's 2 that are older than me, and then there's 2 that are younger, and then there's a step brother, and then there are other kids that kind of came into my life that were like, I don't know, almost like foster kids that like literally would couch surf for a year. And my mom would just, cause my mom's theory was if she would rather have a kid sleep on our couch than get, sleep under the pier or get beat up or whatever.
Yeah.
So she had her own way of doing it where she just asked the kids to come and hang out. And then about 2 days later, she'd call the parents and be like, hey, if you're looking for Steve, by the way, he's at my house. He's totally safe. Why don't you, what's going on? And then the parents would be like, oh, he's a good guy or a bad guy or whatever. And then she'd just be, okay, cool. Well, he's going to be here. You know where he is. He's totally safe. And, and they could stay as long as they wanted. And then eventually they'd go do whatever. I don't know. They migrate back to their families or whatever. I don't know. So there's a lot of kids. I also, there's just like a super open door policy at my house. So, I grew up in the same house forever, from like second grade until I was, in my 20s.
That's pretty awesome.
It's interesting in that I never had keys to the house. It was always unlocked.
Wow.
So I grew up in just a very different space, like that. And that's,
I love that.
So it's really literally like our house was open and the spot where it was rocking. And then there was also like, as I started getting more and more involved in music, it was like the loudest house. Cause my mom was quite crafty in that she would let us practice at the house. So even though the house would be rumbling, her theory was, it was a very subversive approach where she's like, I know where my kids are.
Yeah.
And she just like,
You're not in the streets,
whatever.
crazy.
She just be doing mom stuff, doing dishes or whatever it was that she was doing.
I love that.
But just literally we lived at the beach. All the houses are super close together. And we were just rocking the foundation. So, you could hear it from up the block. So that kind of is like the, again, with the beach, it's kind of like everybody would like skate from one part of town down to either the grocery store called Bocados, which was kind of like the local liquor store where everybody got sandwiches and shit like that.
Yeah.
And in order to skate to those spots or to the beach to go surf, you kind of went by my house.
Yeah.
And so as you'd go down the alley, and we're talking everybody from Jim to Fletcher, like the whole, that was the alley to skate. And then you're like, holy shit, a band's playing. And it'd be like, we'd be rehearsing and kids would pile into the basement.
Wow.
And it was,
that's amazing.
It was pretty rad. But I am super fortunate that my mom was always like really supportive of me just being kind of eccentric and strange and just playing music, and she never really tried to put any boundaries on it.
Yeah.
And as long as I did really well in school,
that's what I was gonna ask you.
Yeah, as long as I did really well in school, she really didn't even have any problem with that. So it was a bit of a trade-off for me. So I just did very well in school, like in high school and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I did really well in school because, holy shit, Minor Threat's playing or Dead Kennedys are playing or whatever. So I was like, I didn't want to fuck up. So I do really well in school, and she never gave me a hard time about it.
So you got great grades. You graduated.
I did very, very well in school. Yeah, I did really well in school. School was.
You loved it?
Yeah. I thought it was cool. I mean, there were certain things. I also went to a school where I was it was a bit of there were no kind of boundary school. So I went to Maricosta, which is like the local school in Hermosa, Manhattan. And then from there, I went to, last 2 years, like my junior and senior year, I went to North High, and North High had this, in Torrance, had this kind of like alternative program where it was super free, very, very hippie.
Okay.
So I went to like one of those like.
It was like a charter school maybe?
Inside of regular traditional school.
Yeah.
But it was just off, it was creative and free form. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's how I started playing guitar. Okay. The English teacher there, again, from Hermosa Beach, Carol Shakely, lives on Porter Lane. Some people that go in the Hermosa Beach folklore know her.
Yeah.
She saw that I had a lot of energy and she's just, again, I grew up surfing, I grew up skateboarding, I'm that guy, and she's just like, hey, here, and she handed me an acoustic guitar, and it was this kind of, nylon string acoustic guitar, and I just kind of, that was it. And then from there, I kind of like, I could kind of plunk out a Ramones song or whatever, and I just started playing, and it was just something as innocent as that, like somebody just gave me just a garage sale special, and I just kept playing.
That's amazing. So
I kept playing.
You're still playing. So what was your exposure to that type of music? Was it through your brothers and sisters?
No way. No way. So no way. So my brother Adam, who's older than me, was more like a classic rock guy. He would have gone that way. My sister was more, I'd say more like R&B. So I learned kind of like Elvis and some things like that from my sister.
Okay.
Even though, Elvis was long gone. But she was more like, she liked more like R&B. Like R&B. And so I would have been more groomed to being in the jazz world. So I leaned hard into jazz. And giving you dumb trivia for 5, when I was a young buck, when I was 9, my mom used to take me to the Lighthouse.
Okay.
And the Lighthouse was like the hot spot that did jazz.
Gotcha.
And because it was 21 and up, on Sundays, they had this Sunday brunch, and you were allowed to bring in minors.
Okay.
Right. And so we're talking about like, Ornette Coleman played, and Charlie Parker played, and
awesome.
Just, Chet Baker, like the fucking gunners.
Yeah.
Well, guess whose dad was the booker for the Lighthouse? Des Cadena.
Oh,
so
shit.
Even though it's like, think about that. Like, you have these jazz beatnik weirdos against like these subculture fuck you people. And so that's kind of like what I grew up in. So I would have been more I would have probably progressed more into the jazz world.
Okay.
But one day I'm skateboarding, and the waves are shitty, and I'm skateboarding, blah, 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 and taped to telephone pole is a Black Flag flyer.
Oh shit.
And I'm like, holy shit.
How old were you then, you think?
I might have been about maybe like 13, 14.
Okay.
And so I'm like, geez. And it was you could look it up, but it's the one that had like these like devil horns. It was like a devil horn one.
Okay.
And it was pretty scary. And I was like, that's insane. It's insane. And
like,
so
what is that, right?
What is that? Well, it's the devil. It's the devil. So I knew, the beach culture is unique in that there's like, the bikinis and the babes and that. And then there's this other part. There's this other world that's kind of crazy there, kind of heavy.
Dark underworld, yeah.
And you could cherry pick people that'll say, oh yeah, no, they have like crazy drug problems and, weird like white power shit and just shit that's in there that you go, really there? That's so weird. Anyway, so I'm going to go kind of a little bit further back.
Fine.
So I see kind of this flyer and I'm like, what is that? And my friends were more like skating and surfing and fast music. And I just kind of evolved into that space. What's interesting is the first few times that I heard Black Flag recordings, because the recordings were different live than they were on the records, I was like, oh shit, it's kind of like improvisational jazz. So I clocked it toward a really progressive fusion-y jazz thing.
That's interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah. So there's that. And now I'm going to go one click over. So one of my friends when I was at Teeny Bopper in Hermosa Beach is this kid named Scott. And Scott was a kid that could afford records and shit like that. And he was the guy that kind of turned me, like, was the first guy that was like, dude, are you aware of like Alice Cooper? Are you aware of Kiss? And things that I'm like, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Right. So by the time I started, going to see Circle Jerks, going to see Black Flag, blah, blah, blah. So I'm knee deep in the punk world.
Yeah.
Knee deep in the punk world. Two things happen. The first one is, Scott says to me, dude, why are you listening to Wasted Youth? I'm like, dude, the fucking record's great, man. The guy plays so fast, it's great. You don't like Circle Jerks, Group Sex? And Scott's was always so far ahead that he was like, dude, you got to start listening to what's happening in Europe. And so he started turning me on to like The Fall and Joy Division and all that. So it really made a very significant change and augmentation to what I was already clocking, which would have been Dead Kennedys and all those other stuff.
The local bands kind of. Local scene, yeah.
Yeah. And then also the other thing too is that in Hermosa Beach, there was a record store called Recycled Records.
Yep.
And, I didn't have a lot of money or whatever. And so you'd go and you'd see kind of like the 7-inches and they would let local bands put 7 inches in the little display.
Cool.
And so, true story, I go to Recycled Records and I see this 7-inch and it's the Minutemen Joy 7-inch. And all it is this white paper with this purple writing on it, and it's like a baby, and is this weird kind of like almost like a haiku, like weird statements on it. And I say to the guy, "What's that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's Minutemen, blah, 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 they're from San Pedro." I'm like, "Great." So I take it home, I listen to it, and now I'm like, hold on a second. These guys are doing like a funk punk improvisational. I'm going one step further on the jazz line. It's really strange, really strange music. So strange. Needless to say, a few weeks later, they're playing the Whiskey.
Okay.
And I go to the Whiskey, and this is the era where, and there's photos of it where they all have bald heads. They're all, and you go, oh fuck, that's like, yes. And I go and see them, and George is playing this blue Ludwig clear drum set. And they play this 7-inch, the Joy 7-inch, note for note.
Okay.
And I'm just completely blown away that there's another extension of the punk thing that is more angular. Okay. And that was fascinating too, which is, whether you're talking about Pig Bag or you're talking about Chili Peppers or things that kind of came later to that, Gang of Four, that part was always fascinating to me. Just the same way too, where I've never shied away from electronic music, where a lot, even though, yes, I have a strong background in punk rock, I'm also quite knowledgeable in Kraftwerk forward.
Love Kraftwerk,
electronic. Like, so that's another thing that in its weird, strange way, clocks to hip hop, which is like, that's, because it's
been sampled a lot too in hip hop.
Right. So that's so it's just one of those really, I one would think that, so I had a pretty big palette for music,
sounds like
and got exposed to a lot of music. And I was also lucky enough to see, I started to go to shows when I must have been 1980, 1981.
Yeah, like 13 or something.
Yeah. And so I've probably seen most of the bands in lots of different genres that toured. Like
Yeah.
I got the other day I was thinking about this. I got to see SSD Control like 3 times.
Damn.
I saw Misfits many times.
Minor Threat.
Minor Threat. I got to see Minor Threat twice. You know, like they did a show at Dancing Waters in San Pedro in 1982 or something like that. Just fucking mind blowing. And here's the Minor Threat thing. So yeah, I'm going back in the other direction. I'm going back in the other direction. So Fletcher, Pennywise Fletcher, lived up the street from me.
Fletcher.
Hey Fletch, what's up? And so Fletcher was again kind of just like the guy he is now. A fucking hooligan. Yes. Crazy. Yes. Crazy person. I love him and he's crazy. Just crazy. So Fletcher, believe it or not, the first band that I was in was with Fletcher. So we had this kind of like this band called Con 800, which was this kind of punk, skater, hardcore kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fletcher is responsible for the one that turned me on to Minor Threat. So like he had like the Minor Threat 7 inches.
Holy shit.
And we would listen to them all the time. And I couldn't, and I'm going to segue into something that I've been thinking about lately, but we listened to those 7 inches and those tapes and stuff like that, like all the time. And I was I didn't like delineate that there was like the West Coast guys and the East Coast guys. Like I just loved, and even on the East Coast, there was like the Boston guys and the DC guys and the New York guys. Like now the adult Doug can kind of cherry pick and go, oh, I see what that is.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was all music. I was like, well, what's the big deal? Who cares if they're from Boston?
And that's awesome.
Who cares if it's like, you know,
that's how it should be.
7 seconds or whatever. I was like, fuck, that's a big deal. Now here's my question. My question's going out to Jeff Nelson and his kick drum pattern. Okay. So anybody in podcast land, if you can tell me, was Jeff the first one to do the gallop beat, to do that swing beat? So I've been thinking about this over the last few weeks, and it's like I remember I could see, like, I'm very familiar with what, you know, Dead Kennedy's catalog and the Circle Jerks catalog and, you know, bands that were doing the do.
Yeah.
But I don't remember anybody ever swinging that kick beat like that before Minor Threat. So if anybody, do you know?
I do not, man.
I do not
never
know.
Even thought about that.
So that's
interesting.
It's, well, not only is it not, it's so wild because did he come to that conclusion because of the exposure to go-go music? And that's how he swung that kick?
That's a great point,
because
man.
that's, oh, please, somebody tell me,
That's
like,
a DC
is
thing
Jeff
only.
the guy? Was Jeff the guy that did that? Which then, you know, many punk bands, whether you're talking NoFX or whatever, can do that skip, that DC skip.
That's a great question for Ian too. Yeah, it's really good. That's,
you know,
because
that's gnarly.
That's a DC only influence thing. Go-go music is a DC part of the culture thing that nobody really knows about, thinks about. That was like Minor Threat's last show was with a go-go band. Too.
Sure.
That's a good point.
It's interesting. And so I know, like, you know, for the drum nerds out there, as they dissect, you know, you start listening to like where the kick and the snares are, and it's on the 2s and the 4s. Minor Threat were swinging in a different spot, and there was a
Can you do that beat with your mouth so that people can listen? Yeah. The gallop.
This is a different gallop, so it sounded like horses on a track or something. I couldn't even think about, like, when I would hear them play the recordings. You know, those recordings are rough and raw, and they're punk rock. They're fucking bitching. They're great.
They sound great today.
But they sound great today. But seeing it, when I saw it, I was like, holy shit. He's swinging in a different... He's not playing the kick like everybody...
How did you notice that at a young age? You seem so in tune with all types of every instrument.
I love music.
Yeah, you can break it down, though.
You know,
I love that.
love music. That's like... Well,
I never even heard that my entire life about Minor Threat till just now.
Well, I mean, I'm asking for help. Like, can somebody show me? Did somebody else swing the kick like before Jeff, or did Jeff create that beat?
Yeah, because Ramones didn't do that.
No way.
No.
And then if you go like
Sex Pistols
even in their circle, like you go, okay, SOA at the same time. Like SOA wasn't swinging the kick drum beat. Like they were playing more like a paddle thrash beat, which is great. Mm-hmm. You know, similar to like a Negative Approach. You know, thing.
Yeah.
But Jeff, it's I don't know. I don't know how, was it the way he had introduced the floor tom into that?
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, that is in the line of alternative music and punk rock, that's a total game changer. And I'd be really curious to know if Jeff is the epicenter of that swing. So
I wonder if he even ever thought about that himself. He just did a beat, and that was their beat. Like he ever thinks about, like, I created that, or even thinks about that.
I don't even know. Well, that's going to be a Jeff question.
Yeah.
I don't know. But being an artist guy, he might have stumbled into it. He might have. I don't know. I mean,
I like how you said it came from maybe a go-go influence, possibly. Those beats.
The swing.
Yeah.
It's like a swing thing.
Yeah.
It's a swing thing. You know, those they were. The go-go thing it lands on a different part. It lends itself more toward a swing than it does toward a traditional
if you even
funk.
slowed that beat down, it might have like rhythm to it like that too. Dude, that's it.
It's a whole different
total go-go.
It's a whole different swing, and maybe that's where he was swinging on the floor tom. Serious minds want to know. This is serious stuff.
Amazing.
We're gonna have, like I said, I'd love somebody to educate me and say, no, Doug, XYZ did that gallop beat before. And you go, oh, okay, cool. Whoever did,
damn, man,
that's groovy. Anyway,
I'm saving this from Ian part 2.
Okay, hopefully. So that's the thing. So speaking of that, in my teeny bopper days, there was this local band called the Descendents. And the Descendents guys were a couple years older than I was.
Yeah.
So we went to the same high school when I was like a freshman. And Bill and I had public speaking classes together. And
public speaking.
Yeah. Well, you know, whatever.
I can see you doing that. I'm not about Bill.
Right. Well, Bill is fantastic and very eccentric.
Yeah. Very
and
eccentric.
So he's an eccentric guy. And so he would always do lectures and speeches on fishing equipment.
Got you.
And
Milo mentioned that.
He'd bring a reel or something to the front of the class and be, this is this kind of reel. And because I was like, what is this guy talking about? And of course, what is he talking about? And then I would always talk about surfing or skateboarding. Because that's kind of where I was.
Yeah.
And so we kind of knew each other. He had like Spanish classes with my sister, so a couple grades above. Needless to say, as Bill continued his Billism, he became more like a eccentric homeless guy that would go to school. Gotcha. Because in his world, and he'll tell you this, that he was like fishing at night, and then he would go like to downtown and sell the fish, and then he'd like make it back to school. So he'd wear like a sleeping bag and have like fish scales, and he was a fish guy.
Yeah.
Some people don't know that Bill is a very good rod wrapper.
Okay.
So he can wrap rods, you know, like the little loops where the fishing line goes.
Yeah.
He's very good at that.
You don't even think about these things.
Speaking of that and the fishing culture, when I was how I met Keith Morris from Circle Jerks was his dad owned Red's Bait and Tackle. So I knew his dad and Keith from the fishing shop.
That's fucking crazy, man.
Across the street from the lighthouse. So it's like Hermosa Beach, it's all ties together in a weird way. Anyway, speaking of that, so speaking of interesting kick drum patterns, the first time that I heard Milo Goes to College, it was hard for me to wrap my head around. They're all phenomenal writers.
Yeah.
Phenomenal writers. And how is this guy writing such complex, orchestrated drum parts and kick patterns at 15, 14?
Yeah.
And that too was a like, damn. You know, even to this day, when you talk about, you know, you talk about the train of, let's just say the train of punk rock or alternative music or whatever, and there are a little posts that you pull over, little stops.
Yeah.
And I would think that Bill, I don't know how he landed into that spot, but he is another one of those game changer drummers that really like boom, and then the ripple kind of effect went really out. So that's another like really
great point,
really
actually.
interesting. But what I find fascinating is how young he was writing that stuff. Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Yeah, so
it's insane.
How would have been teenager, obviously.
Teenager. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like teenager, like 14, 15.
Fuck.
Think about that. Like think about having the like, you know.
Think about my son making that record right now.
You go, oh, even the Minor Threat guys were young. Like
Yeah.
I think Ian was 18, but the other guys were younger, like 16s and stuff. Right? He's a couple years older than the other guy.
Yeah.
I think so. Anyway,
That's amazing, though.
it is
To think about that. Phil Stevenson too, like, and he wrote a lot of the songs too.
he did. They're all phenomenal writers.
Me and Milo talked the other day.
Yeah,
about
they're
that.
all phenomenal writers, and on the, I'll tie it all together in one six. Remember before I was talking about like the beach house that I grew up in? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Bill knew where I lived, and one day when I was, I don't know, must have been about 20. I was off walking my dogs or whatever, and I come back to my house, and there's this little scribbled note taped to my door. And it's like, hey, Doug, this is Bill. You know, blah, 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 blah. And that's how organic and just down to earth the Hermosa Beach was at that time. Like literally, like you just leave a note on the door and you're like, oh, hey, Bill. And that's kind of how that unfolded.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first time I played with Bill was in the house where he comes over and he's telling me that he's rebooting the Descendents and that Tony can't really do it. And he's like, dude, I'm kind of, you know, leaving Black Flag. You know, would you want to do this? I'm like, sure. He's like, well, where do you practice? I'm like, right here at the house. And he's like, really, where? I'm like, down in the basement. He had this like a gray VW bus. Pulls the VW bus in, loads all the drums in, and we did like bass and drum rehearsals, like just raging loud.
So what album was that after?
So this is as he's recording I Don't Want to Grow Up.
Okay.
So as he's recording it, he's realizing the record's great. I'm going to redo it or whatever. You know, we're going to Milo's on a gap year. Who the hell knows how they're going to do that?
Yeah.
And we're going to do it one more time. And they find that they don't have somebody that can actually tour.
Gotcha.
Which was problematic. And that's how that's how I got the gig.
So was that that wasn't your first gig? Because
No.
when you got that first guitar and you started playing guitar, what was your first band from that? And
well, that was like, so I could kind of play a little bit of guitar. I could kind of play drums a little bit. I could kind of play bass a little bit. So I was self-taught guy. But the first one that was really, and as I started going down the music world, the singing thing where I did the thing with Fletcher, so the Con 800 one. And then from there, I started doing stuff that was really angular and noisy. So like very, 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 I guess you could say kind of like free form, like what people know as like the birthday party came with Nick Cave.
Gotcha.
Like I was really locked into that space. And so I was doing this band called Incest Cattle, which was incredibly angular, angular.
What year would that be?
Probably 84.
Okay.
84. Way back on the clock.
Incest Cattle, okay.
And so it just so happened that the drummer, Paul, worked at the high school. Bill used to run the track. Drummers usually talk. Hey, what are you doing? He's like, I do this band here. So Paul gives Bill this cassette tape. And he's like, here's my band. Da-da-da-da. He's like, you know Doug, right? And Bill's like, yeah, I know Doug. He's like, yeah, this is him playing bass. So that's how it kind of clocked for him.
Gotcha.
And then also, I worked at this drugstore called the Guild Drug. Like that was like my, like, I don't know, whatever, like my day job, I guess, or whatever, my like, you know, how I paid for bass strings and stuff like that. And Bill would come in to buy supplies before Black Flag tours. Wow. So I would see him kind of like, hey, Bill, what's going on? And he, again, army jacket, very, very scruffy, just like, you know, that guy. Yeah. And so that's that guy. Like, you know, again, the Hermosa Beach isn't very big.
No.
It's really, really small.
Yeah.
You know, and then when you start talking about people that are involved in music, whether punk rock or whatever, it's like, then the pool is really small.
Totally.
You run into the same cast of characters. And that's that. That's that.
Yeah. So from that band, Incest Cattle,
Right.
he asked you to join
Right.
Descendents.
Right. So I'm in Incest Cattle. So check this.
Were you a big fan of Descendents, or the record didn't really?
No, a huge fan of Descendents.
Okay,
Huge.
okay.
They're the local band.
Yeah,
They're fucking insane.
Yeah.
They're insane.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what?
It's like a dream. That's like a dream.
So here's where how the Incest Cattle thing kind of fell apart. Incest Cattle, Paul leaves, and Don Bowles from the Germs is now playing drums.
Oh, shit.
And it's still very angular and strange, but Don and John, the singer, both kind of are way more tied into the drug culture. And so I was like, yeah.
Were you a party kid?
I'm not going to say I wasn't, but I definitely was able to like kind of keep things on the tracks, you know? So it's like, that's a whole nother subject later down the line as a dad, where you are. But yeah, I mean, it's just, you do things, but I never was able to like go, I was never able to go like days and days and days on end. Like, I usually had some kind of break point. The other thing too is keep in mind, I wanted to surf the next day.
Yeah.
So I knew that if I was like, crazy on tequila or whatever, you're not going to be surfing. You're going to be feeling really shitty the next day. And so I was a little bit more like the guy that like tapped out of parties early because waves were good. I'm going to go surf in the morning. So it just kind of regulated itself like, like anybody else, but it regulated itself. But, so Incest Cattle's kind of going away. And in my neighborhood, there's this venue called The Barn, and The Barn is where the Barn is like in Torrance, and it's a place where like they had shows on Thursdays, and we would all go to do the shows on Thursdays, and I got to see everybody there.
Yeah.
And so I would see Descendents there, and this is right as Milo Goes to College was coming out, and so it was not only was it incredible, it was like so. Undeniably genuine and so fucking good. Like the songs are great, and there are songs that I don't know whether they ever recorded, but I got to see as a young buck, like songs like Russianage and just weird fucking songs that they would do, and
a pop melody and love songs, all
great,
that shit,
great, earnest, sincere, funny, crazy, spastic. So it was really like, I could either hang out with the drug guys, which is kind of a drag, or I could be like, oh, I'll just go hang out with the crazy coffee guys. Yeah. And I just jumped with the coffee guys. Awesome. And it was an easier, better transition for me. Yeah. And I think it just personality wise, it just fit better, it just kind of fit better. And that, to give people context of like how the time was like opposite land. It's like opposite land. So everything that you think about, like with music or the Descendents right now, think totally the opposite, and you're in the right space. Okay. So like totally the opposite. So here you go. Like the first Descendents tour was in this very, very beat up 1971 Ford Econoline van with no air conditioning. Damn. Okay. And Descendents brought a lot of gear. So you know how you build like a loft in your van and equipment's underneath and the dudes are up top? Yeah. So in opposite land, in Descendants opposite land, the area was so small that Bill and Milo would have to decide, and Ray and Matt would have to decide, are they going to sleep on their back for the next 6 hours or on their stomach for the next 6 hours? Because you ain't flipping over.
Holy
That's
shit.
How narrow it was. Gnarly.
You're coughing and shit.
Yes. We called it the scratch stack because it was like, not even 8. It was like one fist away from the ceiling. So it's gnarly. Yeah. Then with the beat up, again, you're in opposite land. So it's like everything's different. It's humorous and great. It's opposite land. So in opposite land, you don't have a good van. You have a van that breaks down every day. So that means what you need to do is play the show, and you're in opposite land. So there's not a lot of people. There's only a few crazy people that show up to the shows. When Milo says, couldn't sell out a telephone booth. He's not fucking lying. It's like, this band is a menacing chainsaw pop band playing to 6 people in fucking Gainesville or something.
Holy
so
shit.
I never did more overnight drives in my life than touring with Descendents.
Holy
Every
shit.
night was an overnight drive because you had to build in time for the van in Opposite Land that would always break down. And I think on that tour, we replaced the transmission because it was so overloaded with gear.
Yeah.
Like lots of gear, that I think we replaced the transmission 4 times on one tour.
Holy shit.
It was a gnarly tour and super, like, the funnest, craziest, it was just a
How old were you then?
there were times I was out of 2, so I must have been about like 20 now.
Okay.
Must have been like 20. I don't even know if I was 21. 20?
At that point, you just working. I mean, did you have goals when you graduated to do something? You just wanted to do music. Did you realize that?
Well,
or you just kind of fell into it?
no. How about this? Music is a bit like an evil twin that I can't outrun.
Okay.
And it's something that, quoting Joan Rivers, why is a nun a nun? Because she has to be. And for me, I didn't choose music at all. It just fell in front of me, and it just felt so natural to do it. And there are times where you're like, I hate it. And then I fucking hate this world.
It's so
and
true.
it's so, like, again, in Opposite Land, there's no career in playing in a punk band to 6 people in Gainesville.
Especially back then.
Are you
dude.
out of your mind?
Yeah.
Come on. So I was doing it more like just for it was entertaining.
Vacation.
It was super fun and entertaining. And again, for me, having as much fun as humanly possible, going into, you got to travel all over the place.
Yeah.
Granted, the conditions weren't always optimum. It was always kind of sometimes sketchy. And
playing live was so fun.
but it was so much fun. And
and playing the songs you love too. It's so cool.
and there were, that's a whole, come on, I got to play, Want to Be a Bear and stuff like that. It's
So
like,
sick.
I got to play My Age and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother, for me, I've been playing music so long that I'm way at the front of the engine. It's like a long train and I'm at the front.
Yeah.
And then I look back every once in a while and go, holy shit, I did that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's this long train. And that's one very funny thing, living in Opposite Land and dealing with, like, this is pre-Warped Tour, pre-corporate punk rock. It's so usually the club,
Pre-internet.
usually the promoters were like maybe like the local drug dealer or something, and it was like a front for some other thing. It was like it was so sketchy, but at the same time, at the same time, it was super exciting, and you got to go and meet people and all everywhere, and the sometimes in life it's not the destination but the journey.
Yes.
And it was the journey, and you just go, holy smoke! I would spend summers wandering around from one city to the next city, not even sure whether the venue was open. Was it burnt down? Is the promoter there? Is he in jail? Mm-hmm. Is it a good show? Is it a bad show? You roll up to town. In Opposite Land, like now you have like you got the internet and you've got like iPhones and all that other stuff. In Opposite Land, you went to the town, and then you went to the shittiest part of town, and then you looked for a telephone pole with your flyer, and you rip the flyer down, and you're like, that's the club, and then you drive towards it, and that's how you got there.
Your MapQuest, yeah.
There's no fucking MapQuest,
No,
dude.
that was it, yeah.
There's nothing like that. It was Rand McNally. It was like that road atlas.
Yeah.
And so what you kind of did was like you got lost. You just like went to the city, and you had to build in time for getting lost.
Yeah.
Because you don't know.
And breaking down.
So, total opposite land. Total opposite land.
How long was that first tour? Is it pretty long?
They were always long. They were always like 3 or 4 months.
Damn.
They're always long. In fact, in Opposite Land, here's again, Descendents. I love it because it's Opposite Land. Maybe the first tour that you did, you got like a tour itinerary on a piece of paper with like, these are the dates you're going to be in Dallas. I got a piece of lumber with scribble, and it was like, what is that? And it's like, so that's Opposite Land. So at the time, Black Flag was playing all over the nation. and they were going over to England and stuff like that. But for the sake of this conversation, they're figuring out how to travel in America. And so when they're traveling, they didn't really have a booking agent, so they kind of had their own extension called Global. And Global was run by Jordan Schwartz, and Jordan and kind of Chuck were the guys that picked up the phones and did the shows, right? And then there was SST and that entity, and then when you'd go to SST, who would be working at SST? D. Boone, Mike Watt. So it was the same.
Wow.
They kind of had gigs like inside the space, and then they'd go tour.
Yeah.
But needless to say, Jordan had booked the first tour, and Bill was writing it down on a piece of lumber. Like, okay, so we're going to be at this show and we're going to be at this show. And that's kind of how it worked. And so it wasn't really organized.
There's no guarantee either.
Guarantees?
You get what you get.
That's, again, you're in opposite land. That's a whole different guarantees. No, there's no way to guarantee the venue will even be there. What are you talking about? Money?
So you would have played that tour in '85 when they came through Living Room Providence?
Yeah.
That's the first time I saw you guys.
Yeah.
Flyer. Yeah.
Yeah. And that would have been considered a good show because they had decent PA system, decent stage, and they actually fed the bands, which would have been, hey baby, which would have been really cool, you know? But yeah. So that would have been, the first shows the Descendents did east of Phoenix. I don't think they ever played outside of Southern California. They played Northern California. They played San Francisco, like Mabuhay and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they never went further. So like the first Dallas show, the first El Paso show.
So that was probably the first East Coast show I saw. Or one of them in Rhode Island. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's the whole, like that. So I'm going to segue into like Ian for a second. Okay. So here you go. So Descendants are driving in the shitty van and we're making our way from one city to another, drinking lots of coffee and having a lot of fun and having more, being always menaced with not having enough clothes because like you just sweat through your clothes all the time and you don't have time to stop for laundry. So I don't know what you're doing. Just wet clothes all the time. I'm a wet rat. Just a wet rat.
Super original DIY shit.
Dude, man. So which it's like it is what it is. But again, it's opposite land. And in opposite land, you have to have your show clothes because you're not doing laundry. So there are many, see, they didn't take a lot of pictures back then. You know, punkers like break cameras and shit.
Yeah.
But I did many shows, both with Descendants and Dag Nasty, just playing in boxers. Why? Pray tell, Doug. Because I would take my boxers off, wash them in the sink in the venue, and then hang them in the van. And then the next day you got show clothes clean, ready to go. So it was like, that's how sloshy and wet you were. Oh, you know how much, come on, dude, you're a wet rat when you stop playing. It's like,
that's because wear your underwear and shit.
Yeah, you just have to change. That's how I did it.
Wow.
That's how I did it. But anyway, so Descendants are rolling through DC. We're going to play the 930 Club. Roll to the 930 Club. We're in the back, the old 930 Club. Roll in the back. Gang, knock on the door. Door swings open. And who is the stage manager? Ian. Fuck. And I'm like, what is going on? What is happening?
Oh, yeah.
What is happening? And Ian, the nicest guy in the world, says, oh, yeah. He's like, I have a thing with the club where they let me in if I help assist the bands and get them on stage and get them off stage. So he kind of like had his own way of doing it because he was, again, even way before then, was super tied into the clubs.
Yeah.
And so he was a bit like the ambassador.
Okay.
So that was...
Welcome to DC.
Incredible. In fact, at that show was the first time that I went to and slept in Discord House.
Wow.
Again, like Descendants, where are you sleeping? I don't know. Ian, well, you could sleep at Discord House. You could sleep at the house. Okay. Drive the van over. Some people slept in the van. I know I took the couch.
Wow.
You know, there you go. First night in DC. So
that's amazing.
That's how that's opposite land. Like you meet and how you can't trade that in, or like you couldn't even imagine that.
I can't imagine.
You can't imagine that. But those are real, like that's real. Super real and funny and strange and bizarre. And that's how I met Ian, was that way.
That's so
as he was hugging amps. like helping Descendents load in.
Wow.
Freaky.
So after that tour, how long did you stay with Descendents for and continue with them?
It's probably about 3 tours.
3 tours.
3 full...
On that album?
Well, it's like... Well, the first tour, we were just touring for Grow Up.
Okay.
Okay. And then, so I'm going to say it's probably about maybe like a 2.5 year chunk of time that's nonstop road.
Okay.
And in between the road is writing songs and recording and nonstop road. So it's like that, about 2.5 years, something like that.
Okay.
But insane, like insane touring. Not regular, like go out for 4 months and then come home for 2 weeks and back out for 4
Were you
months.
writing songs with them too?
Yes. So yeah, they were always really like, they were always pretty open to ideas and things like that. So like, yeah, like, you know, I wrote Sour Grapes, for example.
Fuck, man, I didn't know that, dude.
Yes,
that's one of my favorite.
And I'm gonna
songs.
I'm gonna nerd out and go one step further. I wrote Sour Grapes on the Spanish guitar the lady gave me, Carol Shigley, on my porch in Hermosa Beach, California. Wow, as I did Green. I wrote Green on the porch, looking at the waves. Like, waves are kind of shitty. Here's another one. And again...
Dude, Sour Grapes are my favorite Descendants songs.
There you go.
I had no idea you wrote that song. There
you go. And Milo did did the lyrics. I did the music. Bill helped do the orchestration. Everybody in the band is wonderful writers. And and in that bizarre opposite land, you know, in that world, like, here, I got something.
That's like a straight up...
I got something for you. There you go.
I said this to Milo, and obviously Ramones is a big influence to him too.
Sure.
But like, they were more, for me, they're more like, I don't know, doo-wop-ish, more, I feel like, I don't want to say the originals of pop punk is Descendants, but those melodies and those love songs like Sour Grapes and Clean Sheets, all those songs, like, the melody is just incredible, man. It was very pop, man.
Well, you know,
that could be on the radio, that song.
You're in opposite land. So think about this. Really, if you want to start pulling it down, you're talking about like the Beach Boys.
Yeah, that's what he mentioned.
Lightning fast, like fucking lightning fast.
He mentioned the Beach Boys.
As fast as you could humanly play, and then even faster. That's probably how I clocked it. Was more like Beach Boys, like trying to, like little teeny nugget pop songs. Buck 30, you know, a minute and 30 seconds, minute 22 seconds. Milo Goes to College is 22 minutes, the whole record.
Yeah.
You know? But that, in context, again, wonderful writers, very sincere, incredible. And then at the same time, like chasing this pop nugget. A pop nugget.
But not trying to be big or trying to be that was even unheard of to even be on the radio. But the songs could be on the radio. Thinking about those songs, so like the pop sensibility of all of them, it was fucking incredible. And nobody was singing love songs like that in the punk world. There was
that was a different beast. That was a different beast. And you know, for better or for worse, it is what it is. It's like they're, you know, if you think about like the Descendants is a strange animal, you know. Yeah. It's a bit like being on the Yankees, where like I love them and I'm still like an alumni guy that I talk to them and they're sure. You know, so it's a whole different thing, and nothing makes me more proud than to see where they are now.
Crazy.
And it's almost like if you built a part that ended up on the space shuttle, and you're like, Jesus Christ, the space shuttle is going. It's like that. Yeah. So I take a great deal of pride in like building one of the wheels on the space shuttle or 100%. Something. It's like really a trip. And then there's another part of me too, which is I'm a guy that's always looking through the front windshield, not looking in the rearview mirror. So I'm really like, I have it. I was like, yeah, that stuff's bitching. I'm glad you like that song. Here's a hug. I love you. Hey, I got other things to do, and I'm just moving forward.
I like that.
I'm always moving forward.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I cut off or I'm not connected to the past as much as I'm more frothy about moving forward. You know,
but it had such a major impact.
Insane.
On the fucking
insane. I mean, that is, you know. Yes, and it was, of course, I mean, in context, I'm going to give you context. Remember, we're in Opposite Land.
Yes.
When Milo Goes to College came out, it sold 2,000 records.
Wow.
We were like, holy shit, there's 2,000 people that like Descendents. That's
That's
fucking a lot. That's what I mean. Where now you're like, now we're in a whole different world. But for them, that was insane.
That's huge back then.
It's insane. You're like, that's like crazy.
So did you see the audience get, obviously the first tour was like not many people. Then
no way, man. No way.
Okay.
It was not like that at all. It was Opposite Land. So in Opposite Land, you're playing Lincoln, Nebraska to 6 people. It's
on that record.
Yeah.
Wow.
For I mean, in the big cities, sometimes you can get a couple of knuckleheads out. You know what I mean? There's that. And then when you start playing, America's very big.
I know.
And boy, there's a lot of lonely Tuesdays that you got to fill. And I don't know. God bless you. Where are you going to be? Oh, I don't know.
That's rough.
It's rough. And so then you apply the Opposite Land template and you're like, it's rugged and rough.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, what was my purpose of doing that? To play and have as much fun as humanly possible.
Totally.
So for me, we laid it. There'd be 4 people there, and we'd have the best show ever. Because it was a lot more of a personal, a personal goal and accomplishment. And we loved hanging out with each other and loved playing. It's like chainsaw music. It's like chainsaw pop, and being able to execute that at any time, stop, try different things. Mm-hmm. That was it was a ton of fun. And for people who saw that and connected with those songs, that's amazing. And then many, many, many years later, it's great to see where they are and how they're like, people still love those. They love those songs.
It seemed like
they love those songs. Like they're phenomenal writers.
They're bigger later. It's crazy. It caught on later. And think about those records are so big to me as an impact as a child, and how I've loved those records my whole entire life as almost a 50-year-old man, and how where Descendents are now, but the impact those records had on you your entire life. But back then you said it wasn't as big as you imagined it to be, looking at it as a fan's perspective, because to me those records are fucking huge and so important.
Right.
It's interesting how you guys just out there just playing to 4 to 6 people.
Yeah, you're just doing the do. But what that means is, remember before we were talking about the intention, and I'm not going to say the purity of it, but just the intention of we love these songs. Yeah. Let's go. And it didn't really, so all those other things of how economically challenging it was, you're playing to 2 people. Yeah. You've got a long 12-hour drive after this. It was it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because we were having so much fun applying that to creating music.
Yeah.
So it just kind of overrode all of the negative stuff. All the negative stuff got washed away really fast.
And so the guys just we're just doing it for fun, putting these records out. We'll go back, have a
There's
job,
no career. Dude, there's no career.
No career.
You're not going to lean, at that time, you're not leaning your ladder against we're climbing the charts. Mm-hmm. There's no fucking career, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to go even one step further. I didn't get into punk rock because I was social. I was antisocial.
Good point.
I was antisocial. So those people that know me, they know oh, that guy moves 1,000,000 miles an hour, totally positive. And then there are people that don't know me. And then there's this other phenomena, which is for every hour I spend around people, I spend an hour by myself. Yeah. And so I didn't get into punk rock because I was a social guy at all. It was I wish I could have outrun it. And it just was something where you go, fuck, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. And so it just, maybe in a way it was, that was the way I connected with people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The music.
Even when you're surfing and stuff like that, surfing can be a little bit of I never really preferred to be around big crowds of surfing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you're kind of it's you and a buddy. It's very it's a 2 people going out surfing, and you have your little squad of guys skating. You might have a team of guys, I don't know, 4 guys.
Yeah.
If you were to have 4 guys going skating, that might even be a bit of a bummer because everybody has to wait. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was always incredibly like lone wolf guy.
Gotcha.
And punk rock was, even though I was incredibly antisocial, it was my connection to people.
Gotcha.
You know, and that was like that.
Yeah.
Real, very, very, and I think that there's something very similar to Bill can be kind of socially awkward sometimes. Mm-hmm. Milo can be socially awkward. Yeah. Ray could be incredibly socially awkward. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I kind of fit in that camp in a weird way.
Yeah.
Because maybe it was like a strength in numbers where everybody kind of got together and just rolled. You know. But I don't think I've ever laughed more on a tour than those tours. Yeah. Where it was just total chaos. Mm-hmm. And it was like maybe like the Four Stooges, or like the Little Rascals or something, with guitars, like that.
I love that. So after that record, what else was next? It was Liveage. After that?
Okay. So here's what's going on. So
those are the first two.
Okay, so here I'll try to connect the dots. How did I get from Hermosa Beach all the way over to DC? Pray tell, sir. Okay, so here you go. Again, remember before where I was talking about, like, I didn't delineate the fact that there was like different camps.
Yep.
I don't fucking know. Yep. You know what I mean? That, you know, San Francisco doesn't like the Southern California bands. I'm like, I don't get it. What are you talking about? Yeah. I don't get it. What are you talking about? So, second time Descendents go through DC, 930 Club, Rack Tack Attack on the back door. Ian's there, but I go downstairs and I meet Brian.
Brian
now
Baker.
This is interesting. So Brian has this new band, and again, I don't know him. Hello, nice to meet you. How are you? I'm a friendly enough guy. He's kind of a character. Again, I'm a little bit like, holy shit, I love those fucking Minor Threat records. You know, kind of crazy. Like, dude, that's really incredible. But thinking about Fletcher, like, Fletcher, I'm standing with Brian Baker. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome.
And so Brian has this new project. It's called Dag Nasty.
Ooh.
And what he's doing is it's now Sean, right?
Sean Brown,
and Sean singing. Boom, they blast through the set. Great. It's great. It's really incredible. They're really pushing the envelope of this, where, I don't know, maybe even more like where Minor Threat left off and what the possibilities of melodic punk rock, where that was going.
Got you.
Interesting. So, boom, hug, see you next time. So a couple months later, Descendents are now touring up into Canada, and we're doing like Buffalo, Canada, Montreal, Detroit.
Which record's that?
It's in that, like, we're maybe even touring in Joy. So we're in that space. Yeah. Okay. And lo and behold, Dag Nasty is going to come out and they're going to do maybe 8 shows, 7 shows, something like that. And all of a sudden, Brian has a new guy, and his name's Dave. And you go, okay, cool. Shake, blah, blah, blah. And it's Dave, blonde hair. They're all like platinum blonde dudes, and they're kind of characters. They play great, blah, blah, blah. Dave bounces. Okay, they go back. Nice to meet you. Hug. Hi, Brian. Great, cool, fun guy. Descendents are getting ready to go out and do yet another tour. Holy shit. So this is now like summer of 86.
Are the crowds getting more people?
No, it's right. There's sometimes, dude, it's opposite land. There's sometimes it's working. Well, no, I'm not going to say that it's always like that.
Yeah.
But there are many lonely Tuesdays playing Kalamazoo. Just fucking, it is what it is.
Sure.
It is what it is.
That still happens to everybody.
Yeah, you got, I'm not lying when I say, we could do New York, and New York would do okay. And then there are times where you have a lonely Tuesday in Kalamazoo or just weird, and you're like, this is a trip. But to stay fun, to keep it fun. So needless to say, Descendents are getting ready to go back out and do another run of dates, a gazillion dates.
Yeah.
And Dag Nasty is going to now do maybe like 25. Okay. So they're going to come on a certain chunk of the dates. Up rolls the band, and who steps out? The third singer, Peter Kortner.
Shit.
What? And I'm like, dude, like every time I've seen your band 3 fucking times, and every time you got a different fucking guy. Like, what's going on here? And again, on that tour, Peter's like, okay, so Peter's a different dude in that he's the guy that would be more likely to not necessarily talk, not be more of a reader as opposed to look at me, the spotlight on me guy. He ain't like that at all.
Yeah.
So he's just more like, deep in thought, scribbling in a book, writing, didn't even really want to maybe even be in the gang. Like, like two bands traveling together. He'd be the guy that would like fade into the back and be like, okay,
I respect that.
whatever. Whatever. These knuckleheads are getting grilled cheese sandwiches at Denny's. I don't want to be anywhere close to that.
Yeah.
Bring me something or whatever. That's kind of his trip. So
doing his own thing.
Totally doing his own thing. So, but what happened was on that tour, Brian and I got really close.
Okay.
And so sometimes when bands, especially back in the punk days, have you ever done a tour with a band where it's like, just for shits and giggles, you're like, dude, you and Brian, you go in that van and we'll take this van, and you trade guys because everybody's heard the Toby stories. Yeah. And now you get to, I don't fucking know.
That happened with Adam when the H2O Shelter tour. Adam
Sure.
rode in our van and then he ended up joining our band.
And that's super healthy and great. Because you're in a submarine and you're like, whoa, I can be in a different submarine, different crew of guys. So in that world, Brian and I ended up like just lockstep, and we were always hanging out and always like, there was, I'm going to tell you this, in Opposite Land, Descendents, in 2.5 years, I only remember staying in one hotel. Okay. So Opposite Land.
Holy
now, those
shit.
tours, Dag Nasty Descendents tours, fall into that category of Opposite Land. So, Brian, this one's for you. Hitler is a punk. So, when you stayed at kind of like the punker crash pad, which sometimes wasn't cool because for them, it's like, let's party all night. But for the band, you're like, Jesus, I just got to get some sleep. My throat's totally trashed.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you're staying in like the squatty kind of punk.
People hang out with the band and just play the second all night.
And so Brian had a tendency to want to kind of retreat a little bit to recharge the battery.
Yeah.
And me lone wolfing, I would always be like, all right, let's kind of recharge the battery. And so we bunked many, 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 many nights.
Okay.
So the tour's ending. Brian's heading back to DC.
Gotcha.
Descendants are up toward the like Chicago area.
Yeah.
Right? We end up going toward Minneapolis, and we're staying with Grant Hart, and we start practicing kind of like the next batch of songs.
Got you.
Okay. Now, the next batch of songs were kind of like more fusion-y, flag-ish, more process of weeding out-ish, more where All was. And
you talking about the All record?
I'm talking about that batch.
Got you.
Now, for me, I'm still locked into that 1 minute, 22 second pop nugget.
Yeah.
Pop nugget.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I don't. It just meant I was like, there's no career. Remember? There's no career. You're in Opposite Land. So I just kind of was like, hey, Bill, I think I'm going to kind of like start playing with Brian. And Bill's like, okay. And it was just like that.
Awesome.
It wasn't even a big deal.
That's
it
amazing,
wasn't. It was like one of those things where, again, remember,
jamming.
I'm going to go back to like the beach house and the beach house being unlocked.
Yeah.
And this is how much I love Bill. Like, because those tours didn't really make a lot of money.
Yeah.
I don't know if many weeks later, after I'm like off and doing my own things, he comes to my house, goes into my house, writes a check, and leaves the check on my like dining room table.
It's just like, or something?
Yeah.
Wow.
But that's what I mean. Like, doors unlocked, totally honest,
check, yeah.
honest guy, just like, hey, dude, this, you made $8. You go, woo, Taco Bell for everybody. Yes, man, let's go. So needless to say, Brian decides that he's going to come out to Los Angeles. Comes out, we're hanging out. Brian is funny and crazy and eccentric in his own way. While we're doing that, we had connected with Brad from Doggy Style.
Yep.
And we kind of had like, Brad didn't really have players, and we did this kind of, we're experimenting and jamming. And we do this kind of like a recording with him, and we're now toward the tail end of the summer, and it's now starting to get like January or so. And Brian says to me, dude, I got to kind of get back to DC. It'd been fun. I did the rock and roll Hermosa Beach summer and hung out with Fletcher, and we did all the crazy things that you're supposed to do.
Yes.
I got to get back to DC. And he says to me, he's like, dude, I'm thinking about rebooting Dag Nasty. Do you maybe want to come back with me? Great. And so in Hermosa Beach, in the house, in the basement, Brian and I start shedding what becomes Wig Out.
Wow, man.
So a lot of people don't. I'm sorry, people in podcast land. I worked both coasts.
Yeah.
I'm not a East Coast guy. I'm
born in Queens, though.
But so it's
amazing.
which we're gonna get to the phenomena. It's a phenomena. So I didn't delineate between camps. I was just like, cool. So
I love that.
a lot of people don't know that Brian had maybe 3 songs. I think he had like Trying, 3 songs or something like that. But the bulk of Godfather, or the bulk of Wig Out, was written in Hermosa Beach. And we take this batch of songs now and we're like, all right, we're going back to DC. Throw it all in the, I don't know if you've seen photos of the Dag bus. It was like a school bus, right? Throw it now. By that time it was painted all black. And we're like, just look, it's like the Manson family or something. I don't know what's going on. And we drive it down the 10, and we're like, rage all the way across the states. Just the 2 of us.
Yeah.
Amps, 2 of us. Go to Atlanta, hung out with his dad for a second. From there, we picked up a second car, and then we kind of caravan where I drove the van and he drove this other car. His dad was giving him a car or whatever.
Okay.
We end up back in DC. We're staying at his mom's house in Georgetown.
Nice.
And we're now kind of rebooting it, and we show Peter and Colin the next batch of songs.
Colin Sears?
Colin, right. And so Colin lives up in Bethesda, up that way. And so he too had a rehearsal place in his dad's house in the basement.
Perfect.
And we just started shedding the songs. And that became, that batch of songs became Wig Out.
So can I say, and the Smalley thing, how long had that been over for before Brian rebooted it with you? Was there like a long gap between those records?
There was. Oh, that's a good question. So I'm going to go with he was it's like he's on his 3rd singer. Is it working? Peter, bless his heart, is touring and singing a record that he didn't sing on.
Got you.
So he's like, what the fuck? But Peter's a total trooper. Like Peter's incredibly humble. So he's like, all right, cool. I'm up for the experience. I'm up for the journey. Now Brian has to tap the brakes and be like, all right, what's my next play? So I'm going to go with, there's maybe almost like a year gap between when he comes out to Southern California and when Wig Out comes out.
Okay.
And in that, there's maybe we're maybe on the West Coast for 6 months, 8 months.
Because Smalley was in it for a short period of time.
Teeny amount of time. I think he was only in for 8 months.
Okay.
A incredibly narrow bandwidth of time.
That's an incredible record to make in that time.
I didn't learn that until way later.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of that. Like the batch of songs that came to Wig Out were shedded in Hermosa Beach at the beach house.
So what was I gonna say? I forgot. Peter wrote the lyrics to the Wig Out record.
Yeah.
You guys wrote the songs.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Godfather. Was that one of the first ones written?
Yeah. In that
That's
batch.
one of my favorite songs of all time.
Yeah, in that batch. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was it's just a different. Peter has a different process. You know what I mean? Nobody was really looking over lyrics or, what are you saying? Anything like that. It was just kind of everybody had their own spot on. At the time, I know I'm going to thread the needle on something that's really interesting. How I play bass versus how everybody else plays bass.
Yeah.
I play bass with very, very straight, minimalistic lines.
Yeah.
So I'm more lined up with Dee Dee Ramone or The Cure.
I like that.
As opposed to, I love Carl and I love Tony, and they're very busy bass players. Mm-hmm. Very, very busy. So
Canal, you said Canal? Tony Canal?
Yes.
Tony,
I was talking about Tony Lombardo.
My bad.
Right. Descendents guy who's very
That's
squirrely.
Right.
So again, I'm going to nerd out on music for a second.
Yeah.
So sometimes in my ear, the bass is a foundation that's supporting the vocal melody and the guitar. In some other people's world, the bass sometimes is playing a counter melody to what's going on musically, which for me sometimes is a little bit too busy.
Yeah.
Because I'm the first person to say, I love the Ramones. I love The Cure. I love that super straight straight line,
Yeah.
which was very different. So that's how Godfather is like 3 notes, and it's just a driving bass part.
That's a good point.
You know,
what was the inspiration for like the direction of Wig Out compared? Because Can I Say was just straightforward, like just hardcore. You know, there's melodies on there, but Wig Out was just was it because of Peter's vocals that made it sound that way? Maybe the songs were, I don't know, the songs.
Well, okay, so look at the two different. Look at the two records, and Dave is more of an anthem guy.
Good point.
A little bit more rah 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 soccer chant guy. Peter is more like a poet. Very different energy. Totally different dude. Peter's not going to be Mick Jagger.
Yeah.
He's not that guy.
But how did you find Peter? Did he come from another band?
I don't know. Brian showed up.
Wow.
Brian showed up. I am in Descendents, and Peter shows up, and he's got green dreadlocks.
Sick.
Fucking weirdo. Like
So
a weirdo.
Cool. So nobody knows if he came from another band or not. I'm going to find out.
Well, he did come from other bands.
Okay.
He played in other bands, but the thing is that when and you'd have to ask, you know, I don't know whether Peter would ever do a podcast. You have to ask him. That's a whole nother subject. That's a whole nother subject. But
I'm going to try.
You can try. But I know he played in bands because he came from Tacoma Park. But Peter responded to an ad in the newspaper.
Holy shit.
And so in Peter's world, he was just like, I don't really have anything to lose by going and auditioning.
Wow.
And then he had this different vibe that Brian really liked. And so that in comes Peter.
Holy
which is
shit.
so, but it was something as like City Paper or whatever the local paper is, whatever the local paper is from there. That's how he did it. It was like that. And he just went and auditioned and tried out just like that. And I think he might have even done it partly as a, I'm not going to say as a joke, more like to test himself.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like a personal, like, can I hang with these guys? Like, would this work? Would this
and
work?
he didn't really come from punk probably, right? Maybe?
Well, a little bit, but more, he has more of like a little bit more of like a noise background.
I like that.
You know what I mean? So there are a lot of things that connect together with Peter, like Kraftwerk. I mean, Peter, again, has a very broad range of music. Punk is only one particular tentacle of that thing, and he's the first to, he'll tell you. But he also, if you look at like the by the time Wig Out had come out, that might even be considered a more fragile approach to vocals.
Okay.
So
interesting.
David was more leaning into it, aggressive.
Yeah.
Where Peter, it's much more
quiet.
Yeah. Peter, it's just much more fragile. He's like
emotional.
Your word, not mine. Fragile. But that is what might be considered the precursor to that emo core thing. So yes.
I always say Rites of Spring Embrace are like the OGs of that.
Yes.
DC is like where that should be, for me personally, where I think it came from. But all music has emotion in it.
Sure.
Even the hardest bands, even Agnostic Front has emotion to it.
Right.
I'm sick of it all.
Sure.
But Peter's vocals, and particularly on that record, even when I listen to it now, some shit gives me goosebumps because there's something in his voice that connects me. And this is a compliment. He the same effect that Chris Martin from Coldplay has on me, Peter has it on me. I told him that the other day. I don't know if he understood that because I love Coldplay, but like there's some emotion in his voice and those songs. Even Godfather. I talked to my friend the other day who was just listening to that record again. There's something that gives me like so much emotion listening to just that one song. I mean, all the songs are great, but there's something in there, man.
Well, I think that for like all of us, we're all kind of complex individuals.
Yeah.
And I think that he just decided that he was going to expose a little bit of that.
Peel some layers off.
And so, it's a lot of deep reflection, and it's more, it's not like fuck you, you did something wrong.
No.
He's not the guy that... okay, so I don't know if we talked about this before, but Peter can speak... he's a reader, so he can speak in a language and insult you without you really knowing you're being insulted.
I love that.
So, which is something that a lot of people are like, what? And I think you and I were talking about this before, where when he can say things that you think he means one thing and he's actually meaning something very, very different. And so he's like, there's a bunch of layers going on, and he's a bit of a wordsmith, but he's also a guy that like he knows how to maneuver around things and speak in metaphors differently than other people.
Yeah.
And that's always been really interesting to me. And so Godfather's another one where you go, is it about a train? Is it about a relationship that's breaking? What's he speak?
Yeah.
How come the song like only has the word Godfather in it once and it's not the hook? Like he again,
pretty amazing, man.
it's an amazing, and also he's a guy that like, it's very real.
Yeah.
Very real, very sincere. It's very, he's grappling with things in life growing up.
It's probably very therapeutic.
Relationships.
Yeah.
And he's writing it down, and then it kind of like comes out in those, and people can connect to that.
Yeah.
There's that.
I was spilling malt liquor on my Minor Threat sticker. When I first heard that, I was like, is that a diss? I even asked him that a couple weeks ago. It's like, not at all. Like, just the play on words with that, too. Is
right. But that's what I mean about like the play on words. When you think about that, you're like, does that mean that he's like a drug guy? And is it like F you to like the Minor Threat guys?
Yeah. When I was younger, I was like, what does that mean? I didn't even understand. Yeah.
And then Peter would be the first, he's a ninth level thinker. He's a ninth level thinker, and he's very well read. It's kind of like trying to dissect Bad Religion lyrics. Sometimes you go, what's that guy talking about? What the hell's going on? Well, for Peter, it's self-reflection.
Okay.
Inside that. And that can be complicated. And there are times where he's going to show you the shiny object, and at the same time, you're not going to know how much it hurts.
That's great. So at that point, I think I'm probably going to be wrong because I'm wrong about Descendents. Was Dag Nasty big at that time? Like after
No.
Can I Say?
No.
I mean, more than
Opposite Land. So no, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. It's not so bad, but keep in mind, okay, so what we're pre-Warped Tour. So there's a whole different animal.
Green Day, all
so
that stuff,
again, you do pretty good in Dallas, but boy, there's a lonely show in Chattanooga. Just a lonely Tuesday.
Yeah.
And you just grind them out. And fun. It's super fun. A whole different trip.
But when that record came out, it was totally different. New singer. What was your reaction to Wig Out when it first came out back then? You remember? Because it wasn't Dave Smalley. It wasn't the vibes of Can I Say. It was more melodic. It was more...
I mean, I know, like when we started playing the songs for Wig Out, we just leaned into it.
Yeah.
We just leaned into it. We're, part of the, why do you record songs? You record songs because you think they're great and you want to express them. Yeah. And sometimes it connects with people, and sometimes whoosh goes right over their head. Mm-hmm. And I would say Wig Out was a record where it's like, we love those songs. We're proud of those songs, and we're going to lean right into them. And if you got it, awesome. And if you didn't, that's okay too. Okay. Remember, there's like, for the people that bought in on Can I Say, you couldn't have a stranger second record than have Wig Out. You go, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
What is this band?
Yeah.
Then there are people that were like, oh, wait a minute. I don't have to be so guarded. Mm-hmm. I don't have to sing soccer chants. Mm-hmm. I can talk about things. I can identify with things emotionally.
Yeah.
Very different.
Yeah, good point,
actually. And I think that unintentionally, as the punkers kind of grew up maybe they wanted something with a little bit more thought.
Okay.
Not that I don't love simple punk songs, but Peter was kind of coming at it with a little bit more of an intellectual,
for sure,
an intellectual brush.
Yeah.
You know,
so it was almost like a new audience too, probably. I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of, again, like, you know, if you go back and look at any of the videos, like, you know, Dag would play on metal bills, you know, we'd play on punk shows, we'd headline, you know, I mean, it was we were headlining and, you know, you're playing wherever you can play, but the band was really good.
Yeah.
And we just leaned right into it. And a lot of people, appreciated the kind of evolution post Minor Threat into this more melodic kind of punk thing, giving the nod to the previous guards and then trying to forge ahead into new space.
Yeah.
Also, what is happening is that Brian and I were really, really hyper-focused on Johnny Marr and his guitar playing.
Interesting.
So, you know, yes, we play in punk bands, but we're trying to figure out, like, you know, oh, wow, Captain Sensible plays very interesting kind of ringy guitar parts.
Interesting.
Oh, wow, the Johnny Marr guy, like, how is he? Brian and I would listen to Smith's records all the time, just astonished at how quickly they could crank out songs.
Damn.
And they're phenomenal records for that chunk of time, you know, that period.
Totally.
And I was always, I was having a conversation with Bones from 76% Uncertain.
I remember that band, yeah.
Old school punker band.
I remember them, yeah.
Field Day, which we haven't talked about and we'll get to. Yeah. We're up in New Haven and Bones came out. And I know Bones from the day.
Yeah, where were they from? Sorry.
Like up that way, like Hartford or whatever. That's right. New Haven, Hartford, whatever, up that way.
Yeah.
And I remember him just tripping out one time where we're playing the Anthrax. And he's looking at me and he's like, dude, what's with the Smiths? And he just, it was hard for him to wrap his head around that, like, in my, you know, Walkman, you know, because we had cassettes back in the dinosaur day, you know, those square things with the tape. Max, you know, hey, buddy. Yeah, I was like, you know, no, I was trying to figure out how somebody could do different textures on guitar.
It's cool.
That was interesting. Now,
I never even put those two and two together with Smiths and Dag Nasty.
But when Dag was doing those shows, so I guess right at that wig out, not even talking about Field Day, but wig out time, we were probably on the maybe one of the only bands that was really splitting guitar signals and having a dirty and a clean signal and playing with delays. And it was, you know, dare I say, a little bit more atmospheric with the guitars.
Okay.
Yes, we could play, you know, power chords and crunch and all that stuff. Great. But how can you have these ringing notes and these open ringing notes against a very, very freight train steady bass line?
Okay.
That was kind of interesting. And I know that there's, when you go back on the clock, like some people, like if you look at TSOL, like Ron sometimes did that guitar ringing thing that he was pulling a lot from The Damned on. You know, Brian and I were approaching the same thing, only we were pulling from The Damned, but also from in a way, from the Smiths, just in the textures and the what could be what can be done with a guitar.
Yeah.
What could be done? How far do you take that? Is it smart to do it that way? Is it not smart? Once you've, you know, can you make it evolve?
Yeah.
Can you make it speak in a different way? And everybody goes down that, you know, goes down the rabbit hole with that. Look at what, like, you know, look at how far, I don't know, a band like U2 has taken what could be done with a guitar and where you ended up with a guitar.
It's crazy.
Very, very different.
Great point,
textures and stuff like that. So,
are you a fan of U2?
Yeah. I think, I think lyrically great, you know, great live show, blah, 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 blah. But also the idea, here's what I like. Okay, now I'm gonna come all the way around the hook. One of the greatest things about U2, ready for this, isn't that they were influenced by American blues before Joshua Tree. It's that they were influenced by Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It is insane.
Yes, where you go, boy, those crazy Germans. Kraftwerk were so far ahead of the curve and influencing people, and that's what's neat for my ear. When I hear that, you go, oh, I totally see how they're pulling that part together, and that they were looking at the guitar in a non-traditional way. And how punk rock is that? You can't. That's very punk rock.
That's true.
You go, badass. And then it wasn't until like Joshua Tree where it was like they really started pulling on the American blues part of the equation. And you go, yeah, it's quite obvious.
Yeah.
But previous to that, they were actually looking east.
Okay.
Fascinating.
That is crazy.
Fascinating.
I knew the Kraftwerk was a big influence for them. That makes sense.
Listen to that stuff.
Or the Smiths for you guys for a Wig Out.
Yes.
Safe to say that.
Totally safe to say that. Insane guitar playing.
Was Peter a fan of the Smiths too?
No. Okay. He hated it. He hated it. In fact, he would. You see like their photos of me. I'd straight up wear a Smith shirt at a show. It wasn't until I even know the specific song that changed Peter Kortner into a Smiths fan.
Okay.
Shoplifters of the World.
Okay.
So up to that point, he was like, I fucking hate you, Doug, and I hate that band, and don't play that shit. Put it in your headphones.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until Louder Than Bombs came out where he's like, oh shit. Okay, I get it.
Damn.
I see what you guys are. I see why you guys are so frothy about it.
Yeah.
Now, I never got to see them.
Wow.
I never got to see them, which is interesting. So I only learned about them through.
It's all Minor Threat though. So.
Yeah. Well, again, I can go pretty far back on the clock of things that I have seen.
But you missed the Smiths. Yeah,
but I didn't. Again, well, you know what? When we talked about this the other day. I was talking about this at rehearsal yesterday, where sometimes when you're in a touring band, you miss shit because you're in Kalamazoo on a Tuesday. Yeah. Yay! And you're like, fuck, I don't know what's going on. Like you living in New York, sometimes things don't blip on your radar because you're in Florida.
Totally.
I don't know.
Especially before the internet.
Right. So by the time in Smith's world, they were. It was hard when you're in a touring band.
Yeah.
You don't get to see bands unless they're in this venue where you go, oh shit, I can see them. They're like 7 feet away. Other than that, you're like it's totally out of context.
Yeah.
And then when you're in opposite land and it's like super expensive to see bands, you're just like, I'm not going to see that, or I can't afford to see that.
Yeah.
Or you're busy. You commit your life to a whole different thing. If it's a band inside the space where you are, I'll go see. I love all music, and so I'll go see everything quite on the fringes of different. But
hip hop too.
I'm going to go with hip hop's a different beast for me.
Okay.
So I am not influenced by hip hop, even though the first time I heard NWA was with the promoter from Green Bay, Rich, who was driving me to the store to get Gatorade. And he's like, dude, are you familiar with this NWA? I'm like, what is it? He's like, yeah, these crazy guys out of Compton. And I heard it. And I was like, holy shit, that's more punk rock than anything I'd ever heard.
I agree.
Holy smokes. But I'm like a guy that grew up on a skateboard.
Yeah.
I'm a guy that grew up on a surfboard in Hermosa Beach. Like I don't identify with like inner city stuff like that. It's just,
It's never really stuck with you. Hip hop never really stuck with you. Hip hop.
It's not even really that it didn't stick with me as much as it wasn't something that I identified with, because I was so like, I can connect with R&B and things like that. Like I'd listen to music and go see I'd go see things that people wouldn't think that I would normally go see. Like I've seen Zap. Things that you go, I've seen Cameo. Things you go, holy shit. You go, holy shit, really? And you go, yeah. And I saw those things because here's how you thread the needle with that. Remember, I love all music and I'm always interested in the experience. So Brad X, singer for Doggy Style, straight edge kid, right? Brad,
Never knew that.
Brad, super straight edge guy.
Okay.
As a super straight edge guy. Interesting that later he started Cottonmouth Kings, but that's a whole nother story.
Yes.
So Brad, because his background came from basketball, was always playing with inner city kids.
Got you.
Brad, because his folks lived in like Red Banks, New York or something like that, like over toward Queens. He would go there and hang out and play basketball all day from sun up to sundown. And he was a good basketball player. But when you're playing basketball, you meet other kids.
Yeah.
And that's how he got influenced by hip hop and rap.
Nice.
And so through a weird world, I ended up getting turned on to some things through him.
That's cool.
Because he got turned on to it through his basketball culture.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes more inner city.
Yeah. So we have to go back to, but Doggy Style, we on any of those records?
Well, yes. Brian and I played on one thing that was a Doggy Style record that was called Doggy Rock, which is a really weird record.
Okay.
Kind of like a fusion between Doggy Style and the Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
Really weird record.
Yeah, I love Doggy Style when I was a kid. I could skateboard to them and shit.
Yeah.
I remember.
And so the dumb Brad story is Descendents are playing wherever the hell we're playing, somewhere in Southern California. And this guy, Descendants are playing Fender's Ballroom, and this very, very tall guy wearing a Gilligan's Island hat, like a sailor hat.
Bucket hat,
whatever comes up. He's like, hey, dude. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, I'm Brad. I'm like, nice to meet you, Brad. Cool. He's like, I play in a band called Doggy Style. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And so I kind of started talking to this guy. And then a few weeks later, he and the drummer roll down to the Descendents rehearsal place and he hangs out. And then Doggy Style's getting ready to do a show with the Dickies way out in Orange County. So at the roller rink or something, and I go out to see him. And Brad was the guy that like drank Gatorade.
Okay.
Like that guy. Like super, which is, again, we were talking before about Rich Instead.
Yeah.
Like that's that world.
I love that,
but Brad had his own bizarre, humorous flip, similar maybe to like how Tesco V did with Meatmen. Like just a weird flip on it.
Okay.
Weird flip on it. Anyway, you were saying.
That's awesome though. So you played some shows with Doggy Style.
Yeah.
Yeah. But not records, just played a couple.
Right.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet to this podcast, please do that. And whatever platform you are listening to this on, I'm glad you found me. You can rate me and review me on there also. So thank you guys sincerely for the support. I cannot wait for you guys to hear the next one.